My dear Taurus, there are days when everything still looks the same. You wake up at a familiar hour. You make your coffee the way you've done hundreds of times before. You check your phone, scroll through the same kind of information, and move into a day that, from the outside, doesn't seem to need any change at all. Everything is still working, and yet there's something very quiet, very subtle slipping to you. Not loud, not obvious, just a feeling like you're standing inside your own life, but you're no longer touching it the way you used to. You're still okay. It's just not the same kind of okay anymore. And somehow, that can be harder to explain than feeling unsettled. For Taurus, someone who's used to building things layer by layer, step by step, decision by decision, this kind of feeling can make you pause. Not because you're afraid of change, but because you understand stability isn't something that comes easily. You've spent time creating it. You've been patient enough to hold on to it. You've learned how to trust it. So, when something inside you begins to shift even just a little, you notice. You're usually the first to notice. It shows up in the most ordinary moments, like sitting in a place you've always liked, a familiar cafe, and for some reason, you don't feel like staying as long as you used to. Or, looking at a goal you once felt so certain about, and suddenly, you don't feel as connected to it anymore. Nothing is wrong. It's just something is changing in the way you feel. And what's interesting is this kind of change doesn't arrive like a wave. It's more like standing near the ocean on a very quiet afternoon. The surface looks almost still. But if you pay attention, you'll notice small ripples, steady and soft, touching the shore. No rush. No force. Just repeating gently, but with quiet consistency. Maybe this is one of those moments in your life. Not a moment where everything needs to change right away. Not a moment that asks for a big decision. Just a very soft reminder that something inside you is beginning to move. And sometimes, just noticing that is already something real. You don't have to understand it all right now. You don't have to explain why. Just allow yourself to pause for a moment. Sit with the feeling. Without judging it. Without rushing to name it. Like hearing a piece of music you've never heard before. You don't fully understand the melody, but you can feel that it touches you somehow. And maybe, what matters isn't understanding right away, but being willing to listen. For Taurus, slowing down isn't weakness. It's often how you check in with everything before you take the next step. And this time, maybe you're not checking the outside world. Maybe you're listening to yourself. A version of you is beginning to feel things a little differently. Not loud, not demanding, just real enough that you can't ignore it anymore. And then you begin to notice something. That small feeling, it doesn't go away. It doesn't grow louder. It doesn't push you to act. But it stays quiet, steady, like a soft knock from somewhere deep inside. Maybe you've tried to ignore it. To carry on as usual. To keep everything in place, the roles, the routines, the plans. And on the outside, everything still looks fine. But inside, there are moments when you feel a little tired, even though you haven't done anything that demanding. There are evenings when you don't really want to do more, and you don't feel like seeing anyone. You just want to sit still, as if you're listening for something you can't quite name yet. And in those quiet spaces, you begin to look again at the things you once called safe. A stable job. A steady income. A routine so familiar you don't have to think about it anymore. Those things once gave you peace. They were the ground beneath your feet. But now, as you stand on that same ground, it feels different. Not gone. Just not as soft as it used to be. Not holding you the way it once did. It's like wearing a pair of shoes you've had for a long time. They're still intact. Still usable. But with every step, you start to notice a slight stiffness. A quiet tightness, a sense that they don't quite fit you anymore. No one else sees it. And it's not easy to explain. Because from the outside, you're still the stable one. But only you know that trying to keep everything the way it's always been can sometimes feel heavier than change itself. There's a kind of pressure here, a strange one. It doesn't come from your work. It doesn't come from other people. It comes from the way you once defined your life. You believed if you could hold this rhythm, everything would be okay. And you did, for a long time. But then, at some point, a question quietly appears. Is okay enough? Not as a rebellion, not as a rejection of everything you've built. Just you standing inside the life you created, and realizing there's a part of you that no longer fully belongs to it. It's not a comfortable feeling, but it's not entirely negative either. It's like going back into an old room and deciding to clean it. Everything is still there. But when the light comes in, you begin to see corners you never noticed before. And sometimes, what makes you pause isn't that something is wrong, it's that you're seeing more clearly. More clearly what you've been holding. More clearly what you've been carrying. And more clearly what you no longer want to carry with you. There's no need to rush. No decision has to be made right now. Just a quiet, honest realization that the stability you once valued so deeply may be entering a different phase. Not disappearing. Just changing shape. And maybe the heaviness you've been feeling isn't because life has become too much. Maybe it's because you're still carrying things that no longer fit who you are now. And it's right around that moment you begin to realize there isn't just one voice inside you anymore. Not a loud conflict. Not a sharp argument. Just two feelings existing at the same time, side by side, and somehow impossible to ignore. One part of you still feels at home holding everything together. Keeping the old schedule. Keeping the way of thinking that once carried you this far. Holding on to that sense of safety, even when it doesn't feel as comfortable anymore. That part of you isn't wrong. It's like someone who's been with you for a long time. Someone who's walked through different chapters of your life with you, and understands exactly why stability matters so much. But then there's another part. Not louder, not stronger, just clearer. It doesn't speak in words. It doesn't offer reasons. It's more like a quiet feeling, the kind you notice when you're standing in a familiar room and suddenly you don't feel like staying as long as you used to. Nothing is wrong, but nothing is really holding you there either. And that silence sometimes makes you think more than anything obvious ever could. You might have tried to figure it out, asked yourself what's missing, what isn't enough. But the more you search for answers, the more you begin to sense this isn't something to fix. It's more like a slow shift happening underneath the way you experience your own life. A subtle misalignment between the life you're living and the life that's beginning to feel right. And what makes it different is you can't push yourself back into the old feeling. You can keep doing the same things. Follow the same routine. But inside it's not the same anymore. It's like walking down a road you've known for years. You've passed through it so many times you don't even think about it. But one day you slow down, and you notice you're no longer seeing it with the same eyes. Nothing has changed out there. It's just you have. Taurus doesn't rush to change direction. You don't let go easily of what you've built. Not because you're afraid of losing it, but because you understand the value of holding on. And maybe that's why, when something inside you begins to loosen its grip, it usually comes from somewhere deep. Not impulsive. Not temporary. Just a truth becoming clearer over time. You might not know where you're going yet. You might not know what needs to change, but you're starting to sense something doesn't quite fit anymore. And instead of fighting that feeling, you find yourself standing still. Right in between. On one side, everything that feels familiar and solid. On the other, a new feeling still without a clear shape. There's no need to choose right away. Just be there. Feel it. And quietly admit to yourself something inside you is changing. Very slowly. Very honestly. And maybe it's within that silence that something deeper is beginning to take form. And then one day, without a big moment, without a clear turning point, you simply look back. You look at the things you've spent years building. The numbers. The plans. The milestones you once believed once you reach them you would finally feel enough. You don't deny their value. They still matter. They're still a very real part of your life. And yet something doesn't feel the same anymore. It's like holding something in your hands that you once deeply valued and suddenly realizing it doesn't feel the way it used to. Not because it changed, but because you did. You begin to notice the smallest moments, like finishing a goal and the satisfaction only lingers for a second then fades, quicker than you expected. Or reaching a certain level of stability, and instead of feeling at ease, you notice how much you're still holding in your mind. These things are hard to name, because they're not failure, they're not lack. It's just a quiet distance between what you have and what you thought you would feel once you had it. And that distance gently leads you to ask more honest questions. What does wealth mean to me now? Is it just accumulation? Is it the absence of worry? Or is it something else, something harder to measure yet somehow clearer on the days your mind feels calm? You don't need the answer right away. It's just that, for the first time, you allow yourself not to default to the old definitions. You begin to see some of the things you pursued so seriously were never wrong. They were simply the only way you knew how to feel safe. And that makes sense. But as you grow a little more, as you experience a little more, you start to sense there might be other ways. Ways that don't require so much control. Ways that don't have to follow a perfect plan. Ways that don't need to prove anything to anyone. Just a lighter feeling when you move with your own rhythm. Like stepping out of a closed room and taking a slow, deep breath in the open air. Nothing dramatic happens. But you know you've touched something more real. Maybe wealth is like that. Not always found in what you hold on to, but sometimes in what you no longer feel the need to hold so tightly. And as you begin to loosen your grip, it's not about losing. It's about creating space. A quiet kind of space where you can finally hear what truly matters to you. Not by old standards. Not by someone else's expectations. But by what feels right in your own way. And maybe this is where you start to see value isn't fixed. It moves with you. It shifts with the way you see your life. And slowly it becomes more honest. Not loud. Not seeking recognition. Just something you know, and that knowing doesn't need to be explained. It doesn't come from logic. Not from what you've learned, or what you once believed was right. It comes from a very quiet place, where you're no longer trying to prove anything. There are days when you begin to slow down without a clear reason. Not because you're lost. Not because you've lost motivation. Just you don't feel like keeping up with the old pace anymore. You may still be working, still taking care of your responsibilities, still keeping things moving. But inside, there's a subtle shift, like turning the volume of the world down just a little, so you can hear yourself more clearly. You begin to notice details you might have once overlooked. The way the light falls into a quiet corner of the room in the late afternoon, when you sit a little longer than usual. Or the lightness you feel when you don't force yourself to respond right away. No need to react quickly. No need to be on time for everything. These are small moments, but they carry a different feeling. Not excitement. Not a rush of energy. Just ease. A kind of ease that doesn't need a reason. You start to notice there are days when nothing special happens, and still, you feel okay. Not the kind of okay you once tried to achieve, but a softer kind of steadiness, one you don't have to hold on to. Like sitting by a window doing nothing at all, and not feeling the need to do anything more. No goal. No plan in that moment. Just you're there, and you don't feel like anything is missing. Maybe this is a kind of return, not going back to the past, not becoming who you used to be, but returning to yourself before you had to stretch to fit into so many things. You're no longer trying to hold on to an image of always being stable, no longer feeling the need to prove you're on the right path. You just move at your own rhythm. And what's interesting is when you stop trying to control everything, you begin to feel more clearly what actually matters. Not what's considered valuable, not what others expect, but what feels real to you. A conversation that doesn't take effort, an evening that doesn't need a plan, a decision you can't fully explain, but you know you wouldn't choose differently. You don't rush to name this change. You don't need to understand it right away. You don't need to turn it into a turning point. You just let it be there like a slow-moving stream not needing to be pushed forward. And maybe this is how something gentle finds its way to you. It doesn't change you all at once. It doesn't ask you to become someone else. It simply makes you lighter, less tense, holding less. And in that lightness, you begin to see something very simple. You don't have to carry everything to feel like you matter. You don't have to be certain to keep moving forward. Just staying connected to yourself, even a little, can be enough to begin again in a completely different way. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. And maybe that kind of realness isn't always easy. It doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't ask to be noticed. But it touches you in a very deep way, as if you're standing closer to yourself than before, without the familiar layers that once protected you. There are still days when you show up like you always have. You get things done. You meet your responsibilities. You maintain the kind of stability others can see. But inside you're no longer trying to be strong in the way you used to. You don't force certainty anymore. You don't need to have every answer. You don't need to know exactly where everything is going. And somehow that doesn't make you weaker. If anything, it feels like loosening your grip on something you've been holding too tightly and realizing you're still standing. Naturally, there's a kind of strength that doesn't come from holding everything in place, but from staying with yourself even as things inside you shift, little by little. You don't rush to rebuild your entire life. You don't feel the need to reset or start over. You just move more slowly, you observe more closely, and you begin to listen to things you might have once overlooked. Like noticing you don't react as strongly to things that used to worry you. Not because you don't care, but because you're no longer tying your sense of worth to them in the same way. There are moments when you choose silence not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer feel the need to prove anything. There are decisions you don't explain too much not because you lack reasons, but because what you feel is already clear enough. From the outside, this shift might not be easy to see, but from within you know something has changed. Not in a dramatic way, not as a clear turning point. Just you're no longer trying to hold everything the way you once did, like a tree standing still in its place. No movement, no noise. But beneath the surface, its roots are quietly finding new paths, not to escape, but to go deeper in a way that fits the ground it's in now. And sometimes that's how growth happens. Not through visible change, but through the smallest shifts in how you understand yourself. You begin to see your boundaries more clearly, what you can hold, and what you no longer want to carry. There's no need to cut things off right away. No need for a sharp decision. Just you're no longer attached to them the same way. And in that gentle release you create space. Not a big space, but enough for you to breathe. Enough so you're no longer pulled by things that don't truly belong to you. Maybe this isn't the kind of strength people often talk about. There's no clear image, no measurable result. But if you've ever felt it, you understand. It's the feeling of still standing steady, even when you're no longer relying entirely on what's outside of you. A kind of steadiness that doesn't need to be proven. And maybe from that very quiet place something else is beginning to take shape. It's not something you can grasp right away. Not something you can point to and say this is it. It doesn't arrive like an achievement. It doesn't feel like a goal being completed. And it doesn't carry a clear sense of victory. It's more like when the seasons begin to change. There isn't a single moment you can mark, and yet you can feel it in the air. Maybe it shows up one morning when you wake up and don't rush to check everything the way you used to. Not because you're lazy, but because you're no longer driven by the need to control. Or in the middle of a conversation you stop, trying to hold on to the image of being the stable one. You speak just enough, and somehow that feels like enough. Changes like these on their own might seem small, But when they begin to appear more often, you start to notice you're living a little differently. Not completely different, just lighter. Less tension when you think about the future. Less pressure when you look at what you don't have. Less need to compare to others, or even to who you used to be. You still care about money. You still want stability. You still value what you've built. But it's no longer the only place you look for a sense of safety. You begin to find something that doesn't depend entirely on circumstances. Like sitting alone, nothing special happening, and yet you don't feel empty. There's no need to fill the time with something else. You're just there. And you're okay. Maybe, at some point, you thought wealth meant everything outside of you being in order. But now you begin to feel a different kind of enough. Not perfect. Not complete by every standard. But enough that you no longer feel like something is missing. And that feeling doesn't come from having more. It comes from needing less than you used to. You're no longer trying to hold on to everything just to feel safe. No longer gripping tightly so nothing slips away. You simply keep what truly matters, and allow the rest to leave on its own if it no longer fits. No big decision, no sharp turning point, just a very natural process. Like clearing out a small corner of your home, letting go of a few things you don't use anymore, and suddenly noticing how much more space there is. Not because you added something new, but because you released what you no longer needed. Maybe wealth now isn't about how much you have, but about how you feel inside your own life. Do you feel lighter? Do you feel enough? Do you still feel the need to become someone else? And when those questions begin to find their answers from within, you don't need to say anything. You don't need anyone to confirm it. It's just something you know, in a very quiet way. And maybe that's the kind of wealth no one can take from you. Not because it's solid in the old sense, but because it no longer depends on things that can change. It's there in how you see things, in how you face yourself, in how you no longer feel the need to hold everything the way you once did. It doesn't mean you've arrived. It doesn't mean everything is clear. Just you're moving in a different direction, slower, more honest, and a little closer to yourself. And sometimes that alone can feel like enough.